Hello, 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 hello.
What's up, Arjun?
It is good to see everybody here. How are
What's
y'all
up,
doing
dude?
today?
Doing
Very
well.
good. It's very nice outside.
It
It
is,
is.
yeah. Nice
I'm
and
so
clear and
pumped for
sunny.
this.
Me too, me too. I'm super hyped. Um, we have a lot to cover. So we're going to get started pretty much immediately. Usually we like to wait a couple minutes for people to hop in, but we don't have time to do that today. So
Yeah,
thank you for showing up. Uh, let's get the ball rolling.
for sure. Let me share the screen real quick. Also, people may, as Quint said, people may come in, but also we're also going to record this on YouTube. And I know a lot of people are trying to catch it on the YouTube, so that's also why we're kind of trying to rush this. All right. So, hello, welcome everyone to QBits. This week we're going to be talking about designing in Figma. I'll kind of go over how this will run. So first we're going to talk about kind of theory. I'm going to briefly go through these slides, talk quick about theory, but it's going to be kind of recaps. And then we're going to go into a more lengthier demo with Quint and Varun. And then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. Awesome. So some basic kind of rules. Participation is expected. We kind of suggest following along with the demo and just like asking questions and such. However, it's easier to watch right now and then to try during the demo. So we suggest afterwards kind of jumping into Figma to try. And we also might go over some features and things that you might already know. Just keep in mind, this is kind of for like beginners. However, I guarantee you'll kind of learn kind of something new or a new feature in this kind of workshop. Also, we're not experts. This isn't the only way to design or even the only way to use Figma. However, we just kind of want to share some best practices from our experience, and there is online documentation which will kind of answer any and all questions. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're always kind of open to answering questions. But yeah, so for this week, for this workshop today, we're kind of going to be looking more at kind of this design stage. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we were looked at kind of lo-fi, which was kind of more towards the beginning of it. This time, we're going to look more for like tools to use for like hi-fi or mid-fi and hi-fi. But it's important to ask, why do we prototype, right? So the first kind of reason to kind of test our solutions to either validate or contradict our kind of design insights. Also to self-explanatory to design our products to be used to create style guides or design language for our product as a whole. And then lastly, we also, in some cases, pass our prototypes to developers to be implemented, right? And the benefits of prototyping, being able to be thorough with our designs, seeing an interface work in action or on your phone as opposed to a screen can bring out some major discrepancies in your design as well as sharing our designs so that we can get new eyes. So the new eyes can kind of use and play around with our product and give valuable feedback and incorporate new ideas, and then also to kind of wow people when it comes to showcasing our work. So here's a kind of a quick example of a prototype. These are just kind of mocks from something that would be a prototype, right? Kind of going through it. It has a design language and different screens that kind of all kind of in unison. So here's some tools that you may or may not have seen before. These are all kind of tools used for creating interfaces and prototypes. We kind of broke them down. Feel free to screenshot this. I'm not going to go through all of these. However, there's many pros and cons to each tool. A lot of them are pretty much exactly the same with some small differences. And also, it's important to know that this list will probably look very different in 10 years as UX is ever evolving field, right? However, today, just because it's a tool that we use so frequently at SCAD and we use for a lot of different kinds of projects and through our classes, we're going to be jumping into Figma, right? So what is Figma? Figma is a vector graphics editor and prototyping tool, mostly used by UX and UI designers or digital product designers. It can be multi-purpose, can be used for graphic design, mood boarding, presentations, etc. Why use Figma? First off, it's free, and with an educational license, you can it's 100% free with Teams as well. It's also web-based, so you can open files and fully use Figma both in your browser as well as a native app, which makes it extremely accessible for people to use on any kind of device you have, which is awesome. And it's also very scalable and capable of handling a lot of different frames, a lot of different users, which is really helpful for our classes. But without further ado, we'll jump into the demo.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that. I appreciate you going through all that. And yeah, like Andrew said, we're going to go through our demo phase now. And I'm just going to show you a couple different things about Figma, how to use it, and some best practices. So let's go out of this, and we're going to go into the QBits area. And the first thing we're going to start out with is just kind of basic tools. And I mean, I'm going to assume that you guys have used something like Illustrator before. I'm going to show you how to like make a square, because I assume you guys all know how to make a square. It's a little square button up there. But bring over tools first. These are the things that help you do things. Shapes are pretty interesting in Figma. I told you I wasn't going to show you how to make a square, but there's a square. We're going to make it. The cool thing about shapes is that we can go over here on the right, and there's lots of different options for how we manipulate this shape. So for example, if we want to change the width of something, we can do that here. If I want to change the height, I can do that here. There's a constraint mode. You can round the corners through this little thing over here. It's all pretty self-explanatory. One of the things that a lot of people don't know you can do, just right off the bat here, is you can actually put mathematical expressions into this. So if I want this to be 25% bigger, I can do times 1.25, and boom, it's 25% bigger. This is really helpful if you have a graph, for example, and you have your 100% like that, and I want to make something that's maybe, you know, like a 0.25 for 25, times 0.25. And you can make those things scale based on what you want them to be in that graph. So it is really helpful for those kinds of operations. Another really nice thing about Figma is the way they handle fills. We're going to go over a couple of them with this square example. So over here, we have the entire layer settings, and then we have this fill setting down on the right. It starts with this default C4, but you can actually have more than one fill. So for example, just by default, it gives you that linear fill. But like if I want to change this, you know, you can click on it, change it to whatever you want it to be. If you want to change it to be like a different kind of gradient, you can do that through here. Let's say I want like a linear fill, and I want that to be, you know, maybe blue at the bottom. You guys know how to do gradients. I don't need to go over that too much, but you can have multiple of them. That's kind of the thing I wanted to show you. The other really cool thing is that, again, just like fills, you can have different strokes, and all your stroke options are conveniently located right here in this little dot, dot, dot. And effects. So effects are 4 different kinds of effects. We have an inner shadow, drop shadow, which is kind of like an outer shadow. There's the layer blur, which will just kind of blur that layer itself. And we also have background blur. So if this layer is transparent, it'll blur out different objects in the background. That's one of my favorites because it makes it look like frosted glass. It's really nice. One of the cool things about this is that all the parameters for these, so like if we go to drop shadow, you can click on this little sun and you get all the parameters. And you might have noticed already, as I hover over these kind of titles next to them, I can drag my cursor left and right, and it'll make it really semantic to be able to like put in those values. Some people, like I know some other people who are going to be presenting today, really like putting in the parameters themselves by typing. You can still do that. That's okay. That is supported. But if you like doing the arrows, I find that a little bit easier just to look at the work and see how it's going to look. Another really cool thing is if you hold Alt or Option, you can make any one of these. Anytime you see a number, you can make it a slider. So if maybe I don't want to like, you know, go into the settings, I can just hold down this option button. And even here, like for this guy, for the stroke size, I can do that over there too. So it's a really handy way to do that. And just a demo, let's do like 2 drop shadows. Maybe I want this one to be red. And you can see that has a completely different effect than if it was just one of them or none of them. So that's really good. Another couple things people miss with Figma Shapes is that they're actually pretty capable, especially this ellipse guy. So if I make an ellipse here, you'll notice there's this little button here. And if I move this, I can make Pac-Man, because that's something everybody needs to be able to do. And it kind of reveals these other things. I can move this guy around as much as I want. And I can also change the ratio, which is really good if you have like a timer or something like that. You can see how this really quickly turns into a really easy way to make some kind of those radial menus, which is fantastic. The other kind of thing is this polygon that I have here. So if we go into the polygon, obviously, the most simple polygon is a triangle. We can up the amount of count of these shapes here, or the amount of edges. And then as I'm trying to rotate this is something that happens all the time. I'll get to you in a moment, Savannah. It happens all the time. If I want to move this over a certain amount, like if I want this to look like a stop sign like this one, it might be very difficult for me to do that. So I'm going to put it in its state. And then in this rotation here, I'm going to do 360 divided by 8 because we have 8 sides, and divided by 2 because I want it to move just half of one. And then I can make this, just looking nicer. So definitely use these expressions up here to your benefit. That works for anywhere you can put that text that has like a number up here, which is really great. So Dana, I saw a hand raised. What's going on?
Yes, it's actually answering Nico's question in the chat too. We were just going to ask if you could show the Pacman again, the actual command for it, and also how you turned it into like the little timer thing.
For sure. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an ellipse, and like, that's why I kind of prefaced it. Like, you guys know how to make a circle, right? But as you click on this, you'll see this little button here. And as you move this, I'm going to do that again. Watch up here as I do that. As I move this, it gives me these really cool sweep and arc settings. And I can change how much of that is over there. I can change where it starts from. So move the whole thing globally. And I can move this center point, how far it originates from in that circle. So I can make it kind of thinner. And you can, like I said, you can totally see how this would turn into something where, I have a timer. I mean, even just this looks like it could be a timer going around like that. But you can also bring this out, and it's really good for those like kind of radial menus that we use a lot. Does that answer the question? Are you all good? Cool. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is text. Text is such a wonderful thing to use in Figma. And you can see I have this title here, but something is awry. I'm going to trust you guys all know how to click on the text button and, do the text thing and type. But check this out. If I wanted to, rename this QBits, hello there, check this out. If I start typing, it moves over. Look at that. It's set so that it'll actually acclimate with where I am. Sometimes what I'll see is it'll be center aligned and you start to type like hello there, and it goes over the edge. And that is not what we want. Remember, always do these guys, these alignments based on what you actually want it to do when you edit that text. There's a couple different text modes for the bounding box. We have the auto width, auto height, and then also fixed size. Auto width is usually going to be used for like titles and stuff like that. It'll keep on just going on one line. And then auto height will kind of keep it with that height that you, or with that width that you give it. So for example, this one is auto width because I've specified a specific width that I want it to be, and it says, okay, I'll handle that. But if I add more text, I'm just gonna add more text, you'll see that it kind of flows down. So it keeps on going in that down area. We have a couple different scenarios we need to fix. So we wanna properly label the diagram on the side with the arrows. So this one looks good, it's up, but this one is right. So let's change this to be red. Oh no. It looks like the person who set this up didn't set up auto width. So we're going to change that to auto width. This one needs to be all caps. So let's do that one. We're going to write down. Oh my gosh, the same thing happened when you go over there. And for this one, because the alignment should be towards the center of the arrow, we want to center it. Another really cool thing here that Figma has in the options, if you click this little disclosure menu, we have the ability to automatically capitalize things. So if I know I want all of these to be capitals, I'm not even going to let someone mess it up. I'm just going to select this letter case setting here. And now they're all going to be capitals no matter what I type in. And this one is left. Let's make sure this is right aligned, and also auto width. And you can see how programmatically this text really starts to get powerful. This is very important to do correctly, because otherwise, if you don't do this, you're going to run into problems when you go to edit your files. The pen tool is very much like a lot of other pen tools. The interesting thing with Figma is you'll notice I went into like an editing mode when I made that pen stroke there. Normally, the UI looks like this. As soon as you go into it, you get this different tool set up in the top left. They each have their uses for that. If you want to go back into editing mode, you just double click on it, and it brings you back into that editing mode. There's this little bendy guy, and you can kind of like semantically bend it. You can change the nodes like that. I don't particularly find the pen tool useful in Figma. Mostly what I'll use it for is like if I get an SVG graphic from online, I'll actually go in here, double click on it so that I start editing, and just check this out. This is what I normally use it for the most. I'll just go up to here where you can round the corners, and I'll just like round a couple corners because it looks nicer. This is like legitimately like 90% of my pen tool usage in Figma. And there we go. I think that looks a little bit nicer, but you can have, basic SVG and vector editing stuff in here. And I mean, at least for me, most of my UI stuff is pretty geometric. So, that makes sense. All right, last kind of thing for the tools is images. Images are really cool in Figma. There's a couple different ways to bring them in. For example, probably the easiest way is just to take one. I'll take this picture of Varun here. If we want to move it over into it, I just drag that over from my desktop. You can see as I scale this down here, and as I move this, you'll notice it isn't actually changing anything but the aspect ratio. It's zooming in and out based on the smallest one of the fields. You can change all the stuff with the images just like you can in the fill modes for other objects. If you click on image over here, you can see all the different options, and they actually have like a fairly robust basic, settings that you can change in here. So maybe we want like a really dramatic contrast, and like we really want that yellow to pop. Let's make those highlights a little bit lower. We got this like HDR photo thing kind of going on there. Perfect. But if we want to change how the photo behaves when we try to resize it, maybe that's not what we want. Maybe we actually want to make him look, very, thin or something like that. We can change it to crop. And now you can see I get these crop handles, and I can move these in if I want. But also when I go to resize it, it respects that crop. So now we get like extra long Varun. I like this Varun. Let's round the corner here. Let's keep him up there. Next up is BC. Let's bring BC in, and I'm just going to drag and drop. I'm going to scale him down a little bit. Something else you can do with these, a different mode you can do is fit. So whereas before, when I moved it around, it went by the smallest. Now it resizes the whole thing based on the longest of those values. See how like this one's longer, so it tries to fit it within those. And that makes sure you don't lose any content inside of the photo. Again, sometimes this is the mode you want, sometimes it's not. You can adjust all those here on the right. And maybe I want a ton of BCs. Look at that. One is never enough. Perfect. And of course, I couldn't spare Andrew from this, so let's bring Andrew in as well. We're going to drop him in. And I'm going to talk about blending modes for this one. In order to access blending modes for any kind of fill, each fill can have its own blending mode, and each layer can have its own blending mode. So you can have like lots of different things going on. I'm just going to change Andrew's blending mode. Let's do like exclusion. Yeah, there we go. He's like an evil prince or something like that. I like it. It's cool. I think this is my favorite version of Andrew to date. But we can go through, and what's really cool about that is if I add a stroke, that stroke doesn't have that same blend mode added to it. If I were to go back here and change this one to normal and go through that layer and change that to be exclusion, and then I try to add a stroke, see how this black one almost like doesn't appear. So it's really important if you are going to be changing blending modes to do that on that fill, or if you want it to be global, to change it globally. But yeah, and you can add effects to these. You can add strokes to these. Like maybe if we wanted to add like a really sinister drop shadow, we could do that. Oh, what would be worse? Let's do a layer blur. There we go. He's like just out of focus. He's weird. So that's there too. Cool. So those were tools. Those were kind of the fun things with tools. They're the things that help you do things. Does anybody have questions about tools? We don't have too much time today because we have a lot to cover, but I want to make sure if you do have questions, we are addressing those as they come in. Is everybody clear on how that works? All right, I'm going to move on to the next part. So this is most of what people use Figma for. Lots of people, this is the extent that they know Figma. We're going to make sure you guys really know how to use Figma. And to do that, we're going to talk about styles and components, or in other words, the things that help you do more things with one thing. So talking about this UI here, this is actually a really cool UI I got from the community. We're going to talk about the community in a moment. Figma's community is fantastic. But I just got this UI kind of from there. And one of the issues that we have is if I select this title text, I have this heading text and all these different text styles. If I change it once, like if I select this text and maybe instead of bold, I want this to be semi-bold. Bold is just, a little too bold for me. You catch that? You see what happened? This add plan title didn't change. So if I have more than two, you can see how this might become an issue where I change one and then like maybe I forget to change one on one screen, but it's like the accessibility screen. So like, is it that important? It is. But like we got to go through each one of these screens and update them all individually. And so that's not what we want. We just want to change it once. I mean, we want to do more things with one thing, right? So let's go ahead and we'll change that. And the way we do this is through text styles. And styles are basically just, parts of that object that you can apply to different objects. So we can click on this title text, and this is how I want the title to look. So I have all my settings. I've made sure this text is how I want it to behave. I'm going to click on this little style button up here, and you can see I actually secretly did some while you weren't looking. So we're going to make a new text style, though, based on this text. All you need to do is select that text, create the style. I'm going to name this title. That looks good. And now when I create this style, all I need to do is select my text and apply that style to it. So I'm going to go down here to where it says title, and boom. The moment I change this text, it'll change all of them. Now, sometimes, you want this ad plan. It's like, the normal heading or the normal title, it's a little aggressive. So you can actually go in here. There's just this little chain link breaking, and it says detached style. You can just click on that, and it'll undo that. If you want to change the definition of a style, like you think, maybe this is a little too aggressive for all of them, you can select it and then click on it, and you get all your styles. But if you hover over the one you have selected, you get this little edit button, and you can edit what that style is. So maybe I'm just going to do extra bold. And if you saw that, that was really cool. I'll undo and redo, where it changes between the two on all of them together, which is just such a fantastic thing. You only have to do it once. And not only is it easier, because I could conceptualize a situation where, like, I don't care how easy it is, I want to have the best design. It makes sure it's more thorough, and it makes sure that you don't make that mistake and you don't miss anything out that you don't want to. So that is a really useful way to do that. Another thing, and you can see them all on the side here too. If you want, you can have all your text styles and your color styles and stuff on this side. You can see this is the background blue radial. It's what we used in the background for these graphics and the other thing, because it's in the same project. But let's make some color styles now. So as you might imagine, we got some colors, and I'm just going to click that same 4 circles button. We're going to add a new style. And this isn't something you have to do. I always misspell all of my color styles because I think it's hilarious. So we're going to make this grün. We're going to make this tan with 2 ends. We're going to make this salmon. That's a fun one to misspell. Salmon. We're going to make this one white. So now that I have these color styles, I can apply them throughout my design, and I can turn the saturation up from this one. I turn the saturation down to make it blend in more, but I want to add some color. So let's make this background here. In order to apply it, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on these styles here, and now I have all the styles everybody is using for this project. So I'm going to make, I did that to the stroke. Oops, let's get rid of the stroke. We're going to change the fill. We're going to make that background tan. Maybe the show more button, I want that text color to be that kind of like salmon color. That looks really nice. And maybe I want to do this and this and this and this and this. I want this to be the color green. Now, something kind of cool just happened there. I didn't plan to go over this now, but you'll notice that if I just click on this, I select the whole object. And I have to double click in order to get to these guys. I have to double click again to get to this object. I have to double click again to get to this one. That's no fun. Nobody likes that. So if you hold down Control or Command, it'll actually just go straight to whatever object is right beneath your cursor. And you can save your mouse from having double click issues like super easily. So if I just wanted to select, all these objects here, all I did was hold down Command, I held down Shift, I just selected each and every one of them. It is a really good way to not have to double click a ton, because otherwise that gets pretty aggressive. But those are color styles, those are text styles. And let's say maybe I don't like this green, maybe I want a different kind of green. I can go into this, again, it's the same way to edit it, and just select that property. And maybe I want it to be a little bit more teal. Whoa, you couldn't really see it there, but all of them changed. It's so nice. It's so nice, guys. It really helps cut down on the amount of work, and again, keep things consistent. And what's more consistent, or what's more important to keep consistent than the elements you use? So you can see there's a couple different elements in here that you can imagine we'd probably want to reuse a lot. I'm seeing a tab bar down here. I'm seeing a button down here. I can see maybe even these food and pill items are ones we want to repeat, maybe this back arrow. So I'm going to grab each one of these, and we're going to move it over here. I'm just going to hold down Option to duplicate as I'm moving over, or Alt if you are on a different kind of computer. I'm just going to drag over and do some duplicates. And I'm going to show you guys the magic that is components. So a component is something that you want to reuse a lot. Let's take this back button, for example. Let's say I have a ton of places where I need to go back. That's normal in an app. Maybe you want to go back in settings or something like that. I want to go back. So in order to make a component, which is just a reusable part of your design, we're going to do a couple different things. There's lots of different ways to do it. The easiest way conceptually is just to right click, and we're just going to create a component. And you can see it turns purple. There's a couple other different ways you can do it. You can also just select it, and then up here, there's kind of this diamond box thing going on. You can click on that, also component, that's great. And then also there's a shortcut, Option Command K. That's how I usually do it, just because I'm a big shortcut guy. So I have this component now, and what I can do with this is actually just replace every single part of that design with this component. Ideally, you do this in the beginning. You'd build this from the ground up. Unfortunately, whoever designed this didn't have that foresight, so we got to go back and do it for them. But now that I have this component, you'll notice a couple different things. One of them, if I go to my layers here, you can see this back button here has filled in diamonds, whereas if we go to this one, it's just a normal diamond. That just differentiates this one as a clone of the original, and then this one is that original. And the reason that's important is because if I change this one, it will affect all of the child elements. Whereas if I change one of the child elements, it takes that as an override and it doesn't affect all the other ones. It's usually what you want to happen. So for example, maybe instead of back, maybe I want to have, this point up for some reason. Maybe up is back in this app. All I need to do is change this and look at the other one. Oh my gosh, every single one of these changes at the same time. And it's super duper important because again, it's the same reason you do styles. It's the same reason you do components. It changes all of them at once. So you keep a very consistent design throughout your whole application or whatever it is else that you're designing. So that's all well and good. But components have another really cool thing that they do. I'm going to grab all these guys here. I'm going to show you variants. Variants are kind of like a big deal in Figma. And they help make sure that your one design goes across many, if that makes sense. We'll kind of get into that. So for example, when you start making variants, you're going to want everything to be on the same page. So I am just going to make sure all of these guys are the same color to start out with. And so I'm going to select all of them. And maybe I want each one of these guys to be a different part of a component. So I'm going to select all of them and I'm going to make them each a component. And if you select all of them, there's this little thing over here that says variants. Whenever you have components selected, I'm going to combine these as variants. And now you get this little purple outline. And you can see all these are kind of like a group of components. And what happens is if I take one of these components, I'm actually going to go to assets here to show you where you can get them. So local components under the, I think this is the design demo. Is it? Here we go. So I have this component. And if I bring this in, I just have one. Where did my other ones go? Well, they're under this property. And you can see there's 3 different versions. We haven't named them yet, so it's not that nice to use. But you can see you can access each one of these with just one component. So if I click on this again, you can see over here it has component 1. I'm going to retitle that to be eating plates. So now over here, it's changed that to say eating plates. And if I select each one of these, I can kind of choose what they're for. So I'm going to make this first property, when, and then this one over here, I'm going to call this before. This is during. And then this one is after. Cool. So now I've kind of titled everything properly. I can select this one and you can see this really slick UI. Look at that. That is so nice. That is so nice. And I can go between these. Now, that's not all. Of course, that's not all. So if I go into here, and I'm going to make myself some room. I'm going to select these guys again. I'm going to duplicate them and hold them down. Now I want to have the active versions of each one of these. So I'm going to select this background. I'm going to go ahead and eyedropper that tool. Just by clicking that eye button, you get a little eyedropper. It's great. That's fairly standard. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for, oh, what happened there? It didn't want to use the eyedropper for those. That's okay. I'm just going to go into the fill manually. That's why I could just try to do the things. Okay, that's fine. I'll just select each one of these. But you can color them the way that you want them to be when they're selected. And by doing this, we're going to have 2 different parameters that can be controlled in this one instance of this component. And it's really powerful. So now I am going to go into these, the global sections. I'm going to add a new property, not a new variant. We're going to do a new property. And this new property is toggle. And this toggle is going to have an on state and it's going to have an off state. And we'll get to that in a moment. So this one, the when is going to be before, and then the toggle is on. This one, when is during, and this one, when is after. And you see this takes a little bit of setting up. This is usually done on the front end, but it's like really, really helpful. And you guys will see what I mean in a moment. And then for these, we want to add a new value for these, which is off. And so as I go through these, I'm just going to set them up so that they're all the proper thing. So now if I go to this one, it's before and the toggle is off. This one's before and on, so on and so forth with each one of these guys. And now I have supercharged this one. If you see what happened, there's this little toggle button that I can click and I can turn that on and off by itself. Now, I mean, this is pretty cool stuff, but remember, the reason we love components is because if I were to change something, like maybe I don't like that shade of green, maybe it should be that salmon color that I love so much. We're gonna go to salmon. They all update as I update one of them. That is so huge. That is so important for things like the tab bar and buttons and back buttons and like these little mini parts of the UI, like this guy. We could have done one on this guy, like different variants for this, whatever this menu button is. The more you do this in the beginning, and I know this, like, this is the worst pitch to college students, but like the more you do this work up front, the better it is in the long run for you. So that is the things that help you do more things with one thing: styles and components. I'm going to hand it off to Varun, and he has half an hour to teach you guys how to use auto layout, because that is like, all this stuff here is good, but that is like the next level, and it is so much fun. So go ahead.
All right, everyone. I know you're tired of hearing Quint talk. We all agree that he talks a little too much, maybe. Not kidding. I love Quint. But I'll be teaching everyone auto layout, or as Quint likes to call it, the things that help you do less things to make one thing. And what auto layout is, it's a layout tool, as the name implies. And why it gets the part auto is because it is very expandable and compressible. You can use it to make structures very quickly that expand and react to parameters that you've set up. And so there's a lot of things you can create. We'll actually start off by creating a button, then we'll move on to this card system, and I'll show you how powerful it could be using cards, and then I'll show you even a larger scale structure where you're creating a layout that not only has a button at the bottom, but it also has 3 cards, as well as an icon, a title, and then a view all button over there. The pitch for auto layout is that not only does it make designs really easy to change in the future, it's different from components in the sense that it doesn't make it easy to change where you only have to change stuff once, but it makes it really expandable and compressible. And the mental model behind auto layout is very similar to the way that web and HTML and CSS works. So if you're passing it off to a developer, it actually makes it really easy for them to understand how the design has been built, and they can easily implement it. Now, with that, let's get started by creating one of the easiest things that you can with auto layout. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of text over here. This piece of text just says next, and then the button's supposed to be a next button. What I'll do is I'll press Command G or Control G, based on whether on your Mac or Windows, to create a group. Once I create a group, you'll see that this auto layout panel popped up. I'll Control Z it for a second just so you can see it again. And this time, instead of pressing Command G, I'm going to group it using the right click. So group selection. Or you can actually do frame selection. Both will do the same thing, and it'll allow auto layout to pop up here. Once it does pop up, just click the add button very simply, and you'll see a few parameters. I'll get to each of them individually in a little bit more, but I'm going to start off by explaining padding. Padding is the space around an object. So example, I add 12 padding. You'll see that I added 12 pixels above, 12 pixels to the side, 12 pixels to the bottom, and then 12 pixels to the left also. There's a way to more granularly change this too, where you can change the independent ones. So the top and bottom are 12 currently, and then the sides are also 12. But I want to make the sides maybe 20 in my buttons. What you're seeing is now you're seeing a button, but it's white, so you're not really seeing it come to fruition in the way that you would like. What I'm going to do is quickly add a fill here. Obviously, it's white, so you still can't see it, but let me make it DDD, so it's a little off-white or gray. Now you're seeing the button having been created. This button, interestingly, is completely expandable or compressible now. So what you'll see is, let me add a border radius real quick, 20. Actually, let me make it a little bit more even, 40. So it's completely rounded. But what you can do now is actually look at some of the other parameters. This is where auto layout gets really interesting. Basically, you can define whether the shape will expand vertically or horizontally. In this case, you want it to be horizontally because it's a button, obviously, and buttons usually don't get tall, they get wider, but you can also do vertically. But to show this in action, let me bring in this next icon in. See, the button expanded, it completely changed the way that the button sized just based off of me dragging it in. Let's see how it looks when I do it in the vertical direction. You see how it kind of pushed it downwards? And that's not really a pretty button because it doesn't really make sense in the context of what we're creating. So let me bring it back to the row. But how do I change the spacing between items? Example, I want the arrow to be a little bit closer. I can do that by adjusting the spacing between items right here. Right now it's 10, maybe I want to make that 4, and it's a little bit closer now. And there's my button there. Another thing that's really interesting is that this button doesn't only look at adding other items, but if I change items that are within it. For example, instead of next, I want to say continue. You see the button expand to fill the word continue. And this becomes really powerful when you stack it with components. For example, now you have a button component that can expand and contract and then even have the states where it's colored and not colored. It's so powerful now that you can completely change the way that the button's working on different pages. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do that, but it really just involves what Quint showed earlier combined with an auto layout component. So all I'd honestly have to do was create a component based off of this design that I created. Now let's move on to cards. Within a card, there's many elements, and we're seeing all of them as individual currently. We have the image, we have a bunch of icons, and there's spacing between each of these items. I'm going to group these items individually based off of what I want the spacing to exist between. I'm going to group the top. I'm going to group these also. And actually, I'm going to add auto layout to this because it can do a very interesting thing where if I change it to 4, you saw how it expanded and contracted. Bring it back to 31. But what's interesting also is example, instead of having spacing between items defined, I can also do it where I change it to space between. So based off the width that is set, it'll automatically figure out the space that should be between items. So now I'm just pulling it to change the width. And obviously we want it to go right to the edge of the image. Let me lastly group this together and then group all of them together before I add auto layout to the whole structure. After I add auto layout, you notice a few things. The spacing kind of evened out because we want even spacing between these items. There's ways that you can control it so that you don't get even spacing between everything, where you'd honestly just be creating groups of separate items where you more granularly define the spacing. That's why I grouped this together, because I don't want the spacing between the big title and 420 to be 13. I wanted it to be what I set it, so that's why I grouped it individually initially. And then now we'll do similar things to what we did with the button. I'll add a padding of 20 all around it. And then I'll add a little bit of a fill, which again, I'll do there again. And then once I curve the edges, not too much, what am I doing? Sorry. Once I curve the edges, it created that card just like on the right. But actually I chose a color that's too similar to what the icons are, so it's looking a little odd. Let me, yep. Now you can see the icons are separate from what's happening up here. Interestingly, there's a problem that we're facing inside. The spacing between here to here looks like it's less than from here to here. And the reason is, once you create an auto layout structure, it gives parameters inside of each of the items, to each of the items within that auto layout structure. And those parameters are under the resizing. Currently, I have it set to a fixed width. So it's the width that I defined up here. But what I can do is I can change that width to fill the container. So look at the auto layout container that exists, and then it'll push it to the edge. It was a very subtle change, but as you can see, when I fill the width, it actually evens out the space between the edges. You want to do this with all your items, especially if you want them to hit the edge. There's times where you might not want to do that. That's why Figma lets you change it individually. There's even times where it lets you do that with fixed height. So example, I do fill container. Now, if I begin pulling the height of this, although this image is not set to the right property, as Quint explained, this is set to probably crop. Example, I do it to fill. it'll work out a little bit better. But now I can expand and contract where the card automatically adjusts its height to fill the container based off of the length I'm adding. If I didn't do that, this is what would happen. It would just make the box bigger. And that's not fun. We want it to expand accordingly to what we change with our design. Now, these cards are already made for us, but let me demonstrate some of the changes that can also happen. I showed you an example where the card increased or decreased height based off of the image, but like example, what happens if I add more text? Will it just push the bottom text off the page? No, it just continues expanding the card. So this is why you want to use auto layout. Example, you had to make change to text. Example, you're just setting up lorem ipsum at the beginning of your design because you don't know exactly what will go there, but you do know you'll have to come back to it later and change it. And then that suddenly changes the size to be much smaller or much bigger. You want to be aware of how that's going to impact your project. Now, I'm going to show off a design I had in one of my projects last quarter. And Alejandro in this meeting actually was part of that project, so he'll probably recognize what's going on over here. What you're seeing is an auto layout structure. And auto layout, as you can identify it with, sorry, just a second. In just a minute. My Mac toolbar is on the right, so it's messing with me. Okay, perfect. You can recognize auto layout as these rectangles stacked on each other. So when it is set to be vertical direction, they'll be vertically stacked, and when it's horizontally stacked, you'll see it's two vertical rectangles stacked next to each other. We're going to recreate this design using independent elements. Right now, what you're seeing in this one is everything is kind of grouped together using different auto layout. But in this one, everything is independent. The buttons are independent, and even the icons and everything here is independent too. Now, to get this started, let's do something very simple. Let's group these together because we know how we want this to go down. And let's just quickly add auto layout to that. This auto layout also has 40 spacing between, but you know what? I don't like it. I want it to be 32. So I just dropped the spacing real quick. Now, I also have this structure at the top. And what I'm seeing is that I want these two to be grouped together and then this pushed to this edge. To do that, I will group these together. I can add auto layout to this. It's not necessary. But if, for example, in the future, I do want to add another item to the right, it would be nice to add auto layout. So I'm just going to do it just for the sake of being safe. And the spacing between the icon and the text is 16, but I'm going to make it 12 because I think that looks a little bit better. Once I make it 12, I'm going to group these two together and then add auto layout to those. What we're seeing here is that it's pushing everything to, we're seeing that it automatically guesses the space between items, which is weird because example, I add another item, example, I add another view all, it's going to push it even further beyond, right? Like it pushed it into this page, you can't even see it now. That might not be what I want to do. This is where space between becomes useful. Now I can just change pack to space between. So what will happen is that it does guess, but it guesses based off the width of the auto layout structure itself. So now I can expand and contract it. Something you might have also noticed was that when I put this into auto layout, it pushed the view all button to the top corner. And the reason it's doing that is because it looks at this positioning that is defined here. What we want to position it as is actually in the center. So this is now centered based off of this item, but we can also center it, align it to the bottom. In this case, it just makes the most sense to center it, so that's what I'll do. Example, I bring it back to packed. It looks slightly different. Packed has not only top, center, and bottom, it has even the left, right, and middle. So it's a little bit more granular in that case because of the way that the spacing works. Now, let's continue moving on. Let's group all of these together and then add auto layout. Something weird happened. I had the button on this side, but it pushed it to the left. And the spacing is also 32, which I'm not loving. So let me just drop the spacing first. What I can do to get this button onto the right side is I could just, like I said, align everything to the right. It doesn't make a difference which one of these I use because the design's not set up in a way that it would actually react to the top, left, or middle. I mean, top, bottom, or middle. But I just like doing top because it's the safest way to go about this. Generally, because that's the way that we design. We design from top to bottom. The problem with this, though, is that if I add another button, it also puts it on the right. And example, I choose to compress this, it's actually beginning, and no, even if I choose to compress it from the right side, it's still dragging it, making it smaller from that side because it wants to push everything to the left. This is problematic. This is not what we want to do. And this would be really weird because if we handed this off to a developer, they would probably also align everything to the right, and that would screw up, that might affect the design if it changes in modularity a little bit. So what we do here is instead of aligning everything to the right, let me just bring it back to the left. And then let me click on the View Archive button. And what I'll do is just a little bit of a hack. I'll make it another group. And then I'll drag this group. Never mind, sorry, wrong thing. Let me add auto layout to that group also. And then I'll drag it to the full width. Now, this smaller group that I have the button within, it's okay if I align that to the right. So now, if I change the width of this, it still keeps this aligned to the right as much as possible. But since this box runs the full length, it's really looking within the box itself to align this button and not anywhere else. And with that, I think I can pass it back to Quint. You wrapped up pretty early, but I know auto layout is very complex, and I think there's probably a few questions in the chat, so I can definitely get to answering them.
Yeah, we had a component question. By the way, thank you so much, Varun, for going over that. You did a great job of explaining the intricacies of auto layout and the wonderfulness that happens when you embrace it. So thank you for that. I saw a question about grouping icons, messing with components. You can have, and I know Andrew answered this in chat, but you can have a nested component inside a group and it doesn't mess with anything. It would work how you would hope it would, I think. Cool, that answers Amadeus's questions. Yeah, we're gonna open it up to Q&A if you guys have any questions for us. We wanted to budget some time for you guys to answer those if you need anything from us.
I understand that auto layout is quite complex, so maybe there's something that you guys want me to go over again. Let me see, different scaling tools in Figma.
Oh yeah, okay. let me show you that because we totally went over that, or we totally skipped over that. So if I'm doing this, that's a good question. If I have a text box, for example, I'm manipulating the text box itself. I'm manipulating the bounding box. So if I go into here and like I move this, you can see it's moving a text box as you would expect, but like, how do I make this text bigger? If I want to make this text bigger. And one way to do that is definitely going over here and, making that text bigger and then making your bounding box bigger. But normally I don't really design that way. There's a very special scale tool within Figma that lets you do that. And you just click on this little dude over here and it's just called scale. And when you do this, everything scales with that one tool. I had the hardest time learning Figma because I wanted to scale it and it'd be, oh, not that one. Okay, go. And you just get used to pressing K for the scale tool and then moving it back up. But that is, it's really good. Like if I make this thing over here bigger, if I try to make it bigger normally, oh my gosh, it's huge. You can see that this isn't what we want. This isn't the move. These corner radiuses are tiny and the text is tiny on the inside. But if we use that K scale tool, when we scale it up, it just makes it like a bigger version of how it was below. So that's why we would use the K scale tool. That's what I call it. It's really just the scale tool instead of the move tool. But that's why you scale it with that tool instead of other ones. But that's definitely something I had to get used to using Figma. It's like a different thing about Figma than some other ones. One of the other things that we did want to kind of talk a little bit about is this wonderful, vibrant community that surrounds Figma. So let me share my screen again. And Figma has just, one of the best communities that you can get for a design application. I mentioned it before, but I got this from that community. It's super simple to get there. We're just going to go over to this little home button up here where your file tabs are. And then there's this little community beta. And if we click on this guy, we get all of these really cool files you can download and clone to your specific Figma account for free, which is really nice. You can search the community for lots of different things. Figma actually puts out their own, things. So like if we want to search for auto layout, for example, auto layout, you can see there's some examples using auto layout. And if we look for long enough, we should be able to find,
I think you got to search up auto layout playground.
Yeah, if we search for auto layout playground, with big updates, there we go. With big updates, Figma, and you can see this one's made by Figma, will actually release these playgrounds where you can play around with these things and really learn them with that experiential learning. And you get like a little demo here that you can move around and see what's up inside of this. They have everything linked and like all the text here. It's really, really well done. So all you need to do is click on this little duplicate and it duplicates that playground to your file and you can play around with it and just have fun. There's lots of stuff like this and lots of resources. So like for the QBits thing, what I did is I searched for glass morphism. And you can see all these really cool glass morphism UIs that are designed in Figma that are free for you to download. Let me just duplicate this one. You can see immediately, it takes me to where it is in my files. You can see there's this glass effect page over here. And it shows you how to do it. It's a really wonderful community. Another really good thing about Figma is this, if we go back to the QBits for a moment, is design like styles. So if we go back over to this home page and search for example, iOS, they actually have the iOS design guidelines as its own file, which is really cool. So you can take all these different elements, like I want to design the iOS keyboard. Who wants to do that? Not me. It's home screens and lock screens and notifications and a little like notch and stuff like that. Everything you could need to design on any platform, they have this available on the Figma community as a file that you can download and use, which is just fantastic. Other programs, like some of the other ones we showed you in the beginning with like the different like, pros and cons, they pretty much all got lower scores on community because either they didn't have something like this or you have to pay for those things. And that's not what you want. So another really cool thing about Figma, and like we could have an entire like session on this, we might if there's enough demand, is plugins. Plugins are super powerful. A lot of you guys have heard of Unsplash. Oh, I need to select this. If you search for Unsplash, you get a couple files. But if you search in plugins, look at that. Unsplash has a plugin where you can just like select a frame and search on Unsplash and it's there for you. So that's actually how we did this auto layout, like this thing here. I just made a little rectangle and I'm a fan of pexels personally. So I went up here to plugins and I searched for pexels. It takes a moment to load up, and there we go. I have lots of different photos. So if I have this selected, I can click on it and it replaces that fill with that image. Maybe I want to do like college or something like that. Evidently, this is what Cotton Bro thinks college looks like. Sure. So we can put that in. There's different ones for icons. There's different ones for all kinds of things. It's really, really fantastic. So definitely a very vibrant plugin community. I'm sure Andrew and Aparna and Varun and everyone else who's used plugin, we all have our favorites that we use for different things. It really helps extend that capability of Figma a lot. So that was kind of like the community aspect of it. And speaking of community, there's also a little local community for each file. So the comment button is something that's really, really, really helpful for really pinpointing out, like you can do something like, if I click on this with the comment tool, I can add a comment, say like update screen or something like that, and I'll post that. And now on the side here, we can update screen and you can see we can copy a link to it, we can edit it if we want, we can delete it, or we can resolve it. I use this all the time when I make a design and the teacher actually gives you feedback on the design. As the teacher's giving me feedback, I'll be behind them with the comment tool and I'll write in their comments. And you can get super granular with this. So like if this dot in particular was too small, you could just click on that one. It was like dot too small. You can really get super granular with this and really point out exactly where you want with this one. And it looks like someone else left us a comment somewhere. All right, what does this say? Oh my goodness. It says, this is such a cool hack. Thanks, Quint. And she put a little cowboy hat there. Perfect. I'm going to resolve that. So you can see how it's really, really helpful. And all these comments, you can see that like I have a comment here, I have a comment here. They all go away when you stop using the comment tool, so they don't like bungle up your UI. That'd be really annoying. And comments kind of just go away after that. So yeah, that is comments and community in Figma. You can also publish the community if you think your skills are up to snuff. Even if you don't, you might as well just contribute just for fun. So you can publish the community if you want to, which is really great. Alejandro, did you guys see what he said? Figma's so good, I wish they had their own version of Miro. We did talk about Miro last time. I think Figma watched QBits last time because they saw some opportunities and they actually made their own version of Figma. So if you look up FigJam, it's still in beta. We're not going to go over it this time, but again, if there's enough demand, let me know. I'd love to learn it and show you guys what's up with that, because it is a very interesting, and they have a couple of really slick interactions. But I have some great news for you, Alejandro. Google FigJam. It's basically Figma's version of Miro. Cool. Is there anything else? Anybody else has any questions about? Do you guys feel like you can use styles and components and auto layout and stuff in Figma? I see some nods. That feels good. It's always the goal. What's up, Andrew?
Anything anyone learned today? Any tips? I was trying to remember. There's one thing you said that I did not know. The alts to changing everything to a slider. I was like, oh, for sure.
That's so nice.
That's literally what I commented earlier too. I did not know the alt thing either, which is great.
It's good. And like some people, like you heard Varun when he was doing the auto layout, he's like, oh, I don't like how this is like 32. I'm going to change it to 24. Some people look like that, or some people like look at the screen and that's what they think. And we call those people computers because, they're weird. But I always look at the design and I'll change the value as I'm doing. And it's just a much better way to do it visually. If you decide to do it that way, if you want a slider for things, you can do it that way. If you like typing in the text, by all means do that.
The only reason I did that was because I designed rules of 8. So that's just a way to keep in mind.
Yeah, rules of 8. Maybe we can do a QBits on that and like different design systems. It'd be fun. Cool. Well, I don't want to keep you guys too late. If there's nothing else you have any questions about, thank you all for showing up. I appreciate each and every one of you. I had a lot of fun teaching you about Figma. And who knows, you might learn something that directly contradicts what I said, and it's like a better way to do it. I hope that's like, as a teacher, that's always my goal. I hope you grow out of the knowledge I gave you. But hopefully it was a good foundation. And yeah, I love all you guys. It's good to see you.
This will be recorded and we'll post on our YouTube as well if you missed any parts of it.
Yeah, definitely refer back to them. They're all timestamps. Like everything I talk about, everything Varun talked about, everything Andrew talked about, they'll all be timestamped. So you can skip just to the part you need. You're like, how do you do the Pac-Man thing? You can go back to that and see exactly where that is. But until then, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and end it now, and we will see all you guys later.
Bye. Thank you.